Friends, today we will discuss basics of disaster risk reduction in this session. And earlier it was known as disaster management, but now we call it disaster risk reduction. There are few terms which will come very frequently. For example, hazard, vulnerability, risk, capacity, disaster management, preparedness, mitigation. So all these terms will be very frequently used in this stream, and I would like to clarify these terms first. Actually, hazard, which is normally people confuse hazard with disaster. Each hazard is not a disaster. Hazard is an event which is having potential. It has potential to become disaster. It has potential to cause more deaths. It has potential for economic loss, for environmental loss. But each hazard is not a disaster. For example, last month there was in May 2020 there was Amphan, cyclone. This cyclone, at some places this was only hazard, because it is not causing any death, it was not causing any, there was some loss, but it was not a disaster. Whereas in some part of the country, West Bengal and in some regions of Sundarban, it became a disaster because there was more losses because of this. So hazard and disaster, there is one thing in between, that is vulnerability. If people are more vulnerable, vulnerability is a condition basically, where people are living, physical condition, economic condition, social condition, environmental condition, political condition. These are all give vulnerability basically. And if you are more vulnerable, then a very small hazard that may become a disaster. So I think this is very important to understand that hazard, vulnerability, this will determine the risk. And risk is nothing but, in case you calculate that how much will be the losses, how much will be the death in case this become a disaster, how much economic loss will happen, how much social impact will be there of this. This is called as risk. And risk can be reduced by one thing, that is developing capacity. And capacity is nothing, it is awareness. In case you are creating public awareness, this is developing capacity. In case you are giving training to the district officers, this is capacity. In case you are giving a mock drill, this is capacity building basically for the community. So I think this is very important, and capacity reduce the risk basically. So if there is a very big hazard and vulnerability is less, then it will not be a disaster. In India, now our focus is this, and in the whole stream we will be discussing all these important things, that how this vulnerability can be reduced and what can be done. We will be discussing a very simple model which is called as crunch model. Crunch model means on one side we will take different type of vulnerability, one side we will take hazards, and we will see that in case you reduce these vulnerabilities, then hazard will not become a disaster. For example, suppose there is education, suppose there is resources, suppose there is economy, suppose people are having some alternative jobs, suppose the environment is so robust. So all these things will reduce vulnerability of and hazard will remain hazard, will not become a disaster. So I think this is very important. If you see the entire country, the whole country is highly vulnerable. You see Himalaya, we have very high vulnerability in Himalaya. The whole Himalaya is prone to earthquakes, it's prone to landslide, it is prone to forest fire. There are thousands of glacial lakes in Himalaya, and the whole region is vulnerable. I will take one by one, maybe earthquake. 57% area of this country is highly vulnerable for earthquake, and whole Himalaya comes in seismic zone 5. Even our capital Delhi, it is in seismic zone 4. So in case we calculate seismic zone 5, 4 and 3, it is approximately 57%. Similarly, if you see floods, riverine floods, about 11.2% area of this country is prone to riverine flood. And Central Water Commission, they have given an atlas, and this atlas is showing, in fact for each and every river they have given that how much will be the riverine flood in case more water comes or more rainfall is there, how much area will be affected. But it is 11.2% in total. But nowadays, because unprecedented rains is there, so we have witnessed, there is more area, more than 11.2%. In fact, in case we calculate in urban floods or flash floods, then half of the country is prone for flood, and more than 65% agricultural land is vulnerable for drought. In fact, India's basic problem was water related, either too much of water or too less of water. Similarly, cyclones. We have east coast, which is more than 7,000 kilometers. We have west coast, more than 4,000. So 11,000 kilometer area is cyclone prone. And every year in Bay of Bengal, there are 3 to 4 or 5 cyclones are formed. Mainly they are there in September, October, but this time we were having it in May, and there was 2 cyclones which were formed, one in Bay of Bengal and one in Arabian Sea. So I think the frequency of cyclone is increasing, but I want to say that lots of, coastal area is there, and the entire coastal area is vulnerable for cyclones. We have landslides, because Himalaya is a very young mountain, and there are possibilities of landslides. Every year, all Himalayan states, they face landslides and huge economic loss, agricultural loss because of landslides. We have another disaster, which is the country is becoming more prone, and some of these states, they are more vulnerable for that is forest fire. You have seen Uttarakhand, very frequent forest fire. Sikkim, earlier there was not that much fire, but now we are witnessing more and more forest fire. There are avalanches, there are tsunami. We never witnessed, in 200 years, but in 2004 we had tsunami. So that and the entire coastal area become vulnerable for tsunami. We have, so similarly, all these natural calamities, natural disasters, if you see the map of India, there is no part which is not vulnerable for any natural calamity, and you can say that this is the safest part from natural disaster point of view. And that's why we say that in case we are prepared, then definitely we can save ourselves, we can save economy, because about 2% of GDP we lose every year in natural disasters. Sometimes it is much more. For example, this COVID-19, I think the losses will be enormous. We have not yet calculated, and so I think this is very important, that how much is now the one more important thing which we will discuss in this session, and that is relationship of disasters with development, and how this development can increase vulnerability and can decrease vulnerability. Because when we do development, because we are developing country, there are number of things happening, we are constructing roads, we are constructing highways, we are having, railway lines, we are going for bullet trains. So in developing country, each and every development, in case, we are not seeing that the vulnerability of the place. For example, if the place is vulnerable for floods, then we should see that what should be direction of the road, whether there is a proper culverts, whether there is a proper way, for drains, etc. And in case we are doing that kind of development, then there is no problem. It is decreasing vulnerability. Sometimes development increase vulnerability. For example, in case you are Indira Awas Yojana, we are giving houses to the people, but in case these houses, if there is a little earthquake and all the houses collapsed, then it is increasing vulnerability. Disaster give opportunity, for right kind of development. When something happen, any disaster, for example, in Gujarat there was earthquake. So after earthquake, they decide that we will build a very strong Gujarat, and they did it. So that give opportunity to the state, for right kind of development and reduce their vulnerability. So, and if some disaster happen, then the disaster, this stop development basically. For example, now we are having COVID-19, and each and every developmental activity, each and everything is stopped. Everybody is just talking one thing, how to mitigate it, how to prevent it, and the whole administration, the basic issue is this. So whenever there is any big disaster, we stop each and everything, we stop development, and we are just involved in this. And most of the money, our resources, they go for this prevention, mitigation of this kind of disaster. So these are some of the basic things which we will be discussing in detail in this session. Thank you.